G'day everybody, it is Matt from Skate Parts here, and today we are comparing the AAA WristSaver 2 wrist guards with the AAA RD WristSaver Roller Derby wrist guards. So the WristSaver 2 came out before the RD and has been around for a lot longer, and it is based very closely off the WristSaver 1, which is a 3-strap wrist guard, whereas this WristSaver 2 is a 1-strap slide-on style. The RD is an adaptation of the slide-on wrist guard, the WristSaver 2, to make it sturdier, tougher, and harder wearing for people who are having a lot more impacts on a more regular basis, such as in roller derby. The WristSaver 2, originally designed just as a regular wrist guard for inline skating, skateboarding, that sort of thing, to give you some protection from what are hopefully very few falls. So big difference in that intended purpose there. These ones, the WristSaver 2s, are not meant for a lot of frequent impact. The RD WristSaver, on the other hand, is. So as a result, it is a much tougher, sturdier wrist guard. If we have a close look at them, we can see the WristSaver 2 has a firm strap here, where the RD WristSaver has an elastic strap, and so this elastic strap does have a fair bit of stretch in it. The WristSaver 2 does not have that. The WristSaver itself is a lot stretchier. Both sides of the WristSaver use this stretch mesh, and it's quite thin and quite breathable, but also quite stretchy, so you can quite easily fit your hand into it. And then this strap really just serves the purpose of making sure it's locked on nice and tight. In the RD WristSaver, on the other hand, not so much. We have this neoprene type of material here with these perforated holes. It does have some stretch to it, but nowhere near as much as the stretch mesh in the WristSaver 2. So you're more likely to need to go up a size in these ones and go to something a bit bigger, just because of how much less stretch there is in this material. Other differences, you might have noticed already the splints on top. They're basically the same shape, and it's a very similar splint, although I believe the splint in the RD is a little bit thicker than the splint in the WristSaver 2. On the underside though, they are quite different. They are just as thick at both ends. However, in the middle, where it's actually intended to take most of that impact, the RD is a lot wider, and it is also a little bit thicker. So the aim there is that it should stand up to more impacts for you and give you better protection and better disperse that force from your impacts across that wider splint. Looking on the inside, both of these do have a foam padding on their inside of their splints to help just to help make it a little bit softer on your fall. However, on the RD wrist guard, that foam is a little bit thicker, and it's very difficult to see that in the video, but it is just a little bit thicker, so there's a little bit more padding. And it's also got a terry cloth lining on the inside here. So again, it makes it just that little bit softer, and also will be a bit more moisture absorbent, which is important given these don't breathe quite as well as the stretch mesh in these ones. Also different on the top of the wrist guard. The WristSaver 2 doesn't really have anything on top, just that material covering the splint. The RD does have the 888 Sweat Saver liner on the top of the splint covering here, which goes just above the strap to serve as a brow wipe for you when you're skating on the track and that sort of thing. Other things to note that are different is the RD is double stitched all throughout. The WristSaver 2 is not. It is only double stitched in the key impact areas. And so as a result, again, the RD will better stand up to more impacts. Both of them do have completely replaceable splints, so top and bottom can be removed and replaced if the rest of the wrist guard is still perfectly fine to continue to be reused. Generally speaking, if the splints have been snapped or severely damaged though, you may find there is damage elsewhere in the wrist guards. This is the same with both of them. However, the RD is more likely to come out unscathed. In terms of fit, they are sized very similarly, but again, you're more likely to need to go up a size in the RD just because of how much tighter it is to put on. Both do have these loops for helping to pull them on. The RD is red just to help differentiate it from the WristSaver. And one other thing that's of note with the RD is on the tags, it does tell you which hand they are for. This one tells me it's for the left hand, whereas the WristSaver 2 does not tell you anywhere on it what hand it is for. Of course, if you're familiar with wrist guards, you'll figure out pretty quick that obviously this hole is where your thumb goes, and you want to have this splint on the bottom. So that's the same regardless. It's just the RD does have that actual marking on the tag to tell you. Now when it comes to wearing the wrist guards, they're very similar to put on. Basically, you're sliding your hand in like so, You want to have, again, this bigger splint on the bottom. Your strap goes around and Velcros on in the RD. And then basically the same thing in the WristSaver 2. Your hand is going through like so. Strap goes around and Velcro locks it on. And so they're very, very similar. As you can see on from the top, the RD does appear to be bigger and sturdier. Both go around the thumb area quite nicely. This is actually a good angle to see the difference in just how much thicker the RD is through some of these high intensity areas than the WristSaver 2. There's a lot more material here and it's double stitched on both sides. So when you come down, you're putting a lot of pressure on that piece of fabric there between your thumb and forefinger. So that's going to last better. Underneath, again, you can see just how different the splints are. And on top, we have that terry cloth versus just that regular material covering the splint there. And you can't really see this on the camera, but the RD does actually protrude out further, the splint, than the WristSaver 2. And again, that's just helping to take more of that impact and absorb that shock so your wrist doesn't have to. I do also find a lot with the 888 WristSaver 2 that this side, the opposite side from your thumb, the outside of your hand, this section here is perhaps a little bit on the narrow side and can often result in the splint being pulled over to this side of your palm a bit more. And the RD, this is actually quite a bit thicker here. And because this is actually a little bit stretchy on both sides, where the WristSaver 2 actually is not stretchy on this bottom side, where it just has that little bit of a vinyl-y finish, I find as a result, the RD tends to sit closer to the middle of your palm better and doesn't get pulled over as much. And so again, it just contributes to it being a better fit and more suitable for lots of regular high impact activities. So that's it. That is the 888 RD versus the 888 WristSaver 2 slide-on wrist guards. I hope you found this video helpful. For more information and pricing, make sure you check out the links down below. Bye for now.